Welcome to the NCDWI Guide podcast, where defenders of the Constitution assemble to prepare for courtroom battle and firm owners gather to develop marketing strategies that will revolutionize the practice of criminal defense. Here's your host, the NCDWI guy, Jake Minnick.
Hello, fellow freedom fighters, and welcome to episode 202 of the NCDWI Guy podcast. On today's episode, I have my good friend Thomas Amburgey on the podcast to talk about all things criminal defense as we continue the Courtroom Warriors series, highlighting some of the young leaders in criminal defense in North Carolina. Thomas is a board-certified specialist in state criminal law, former prosecutor, has tried hundreds of cases in district court, more than 70 in front of a jury, and is really a warrior when it comes to going to bat for his clients. Thomas is one of the local members of the Buncombe County Bar that I am a part of, and has really been an amazing leader in the local bar for the criminal defense. He is somebody that I think always has a very practical eye toward handling cases, towards representation, but is incredibly aggressive, incredibly thoughtful about his defense. And I'm very excited to dive into kind of where this came from in Thomas's life and some of the kind of practical suggestions that he shares during today's episode. Really enjoyed, as I always do, talking with Thomas, and I hope that you guys enjoy this conversation. Okay. Thomas, I'm super excited to have you on the podcast. You are definitely one of the lawyers that throughout my practice, from your time as a DA and now as a criminal defense lawyer, I have very much respected as really knowing your stuff. And you've been that way since the first day that I've known you. Always bringing high representation into the courtroom from both sides of the table, very prepared, thoughtful about how you defend clients. And so very excited to kind of get some insights from you from both ends of the spectrum when it comes to criminal defense. So thanks very much for coming on and talking to us and to the audience.
Absolutely. No problem.
Well, I before we kind of like get too into the weeds in terms of criminal defense and kind of how you shifted into that practice, what you have done with your firm since going into criminal defense, maybe we can just start with a little bit of a background about how you got into the world of law in the first place and criminal defense specifically. So yeah, how did that kind of how'd you get to law school?
So I think I'm somewhat not unique, but like I knew from very early on I wanted to go to law school. I say early on, like in high school, like I knew that's what I wanted to do. I don't really remember how that came about. No lawyers in my family. My family hates lawyers for the most part. Have always hated lawyers, kind of still do. But I've always really enjoyed like engaging and basically like arguing with people. I know that sounds cliche, but that's just what I do. It's what me and my friends do. And so I wanted to go to law school, and then I went through undergrad, never changed, went to law school, loved every minute of it. I mean, it's not fun, but like I never really had that moment. I'm like, is this really what I want to do?
Yeah.
And when I was in law school, I met a lady who's from Asheville, North Carolina. That's how I ended up here, because I'm originally from Tennessee. And, she had done an internship with the DA's office just the summer before or the summer while I was taking the bar. I can't remember which one it was. I think it was the summer before. And that got me an interview with the DA's office, and that's how I ended up kind of starting my career. So took the bar, passed it, and started at the DA's office like the next day after I got the letter.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's awesome. Remind me, which law school did you go to?
Appalachian School of Law. It's up there in Virginia.
Okay. And when you were there, was there anything specific about criminal defense that had drawn you in kind of prior to that opportunity opening up? Was there anything that kind of, no? That was,
No, I know I told multiple people this. I've had like two of them come back and quote it to me, kind of like, "Hey, what are you doing?" I remember telling people, it'd be like, "Hey, what kind of lawyer do you want to be?" That's a real common question everybody gets. And my answer was usually something along the lines of, I don't know, I want to be like a real estate or corporate attorney. I
yeah,
don't want to deal with people's personal lives. And I remember saying, like, I know what I don't want to do. I never want to be a criminal defense attorney because I don't know how those guys sleep at night. Like I told multiple people that. And so when the opportunity came along to be a prosecutor, that always kind of seemed like something maybe as a something like, all right, well, maybe I'd like to be a prosecutor. That, self-righteous, like all that kind of stuff.
yeah,
Like I can
yeah,
do that. And when you get out of law school, so I graduated in 2007 and the economy hadn't like tanked yet, but it's everybody's like panicked about how you get a job, right? And
yeah.
so I was moving to a town that I had basically zero connections with other than my wife's family, but she was just my girlfriend at that point, and had no other connections whatsoever. And so the DA's office was kind of like, just, all right, I knew I was taking the bar in North Carolina. I wanted to be in Asheville, and that was the job that was offered. And I was excited about it. I thought, all right, this would be fun. Um, and after about, to kind of the follow-up question, how did I become a defense attorney? After about 6 months of being a prosecutor, my outlook on what defense attorneys actually do, kind of my perception as to the griminess of the business, which there's some of that out there, but like I realize that now these people are, for the most part, they're playing a very important role, and at that point I didn't necessarily see myself doing it, but I started to appreciate who they were, what role they wore, and my respect grew pretty quickly after 6 months or so. So
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely connect with that. Whether it's self-righteous or just kind of which side of the table that feel most connected to. And
sure,
yeah, coming out of law school, I had written a brief for the prosecution in my 3L year. In moot court competition, I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to
yeah,
be a prosecutor. I applied probably to like 40 different
uh-huh.
prosecutor or prosecutorial districts, or not necessarily 40 counties, like every place that I could apply to, like within reason. I sent a application off to, and I'm thankful now that it didn't pan out, but that was definitely the side of the table that I was, kind of saw myself on. And it is interesting because I think that being in the courtroom, and especially in district court, it is really eye-opening to see kind of what the roles in the courtroom, what everybody is doing with cases. Like, it's even from the judge's perspective of like, it's all about moving cases and getting things done to some extent. So it's very different than, kind of what I had pictured it in the like kind of lofty ideals of what
Yeah.
criminal defense was all about. So
Well, district court's like such an eye-opening experience,
yeah,
right? I mean, like, I don't know, and I want you to tell me here in a second, like exactly how you started your career, but like the way that the DA's office when I was there started, I mean, it literally like day one, you're watching somebody do it, and very quickly within that first day,
yeah,
they're giving you stuff to deal with. And I still get panicked sometimes when I deal with cases. Well, you multiply that times like 1,000 as to you're
yeah.
fresh out of law school. You're dealing with a cop that knows more than you, a clerk that knows more than you, a judge that knows more than you, a defendant that knows more than you half the time, or sometimes. And it's that took some real getting used to.
Yeah.
And I don't, I remember, I think it was Stan Young telling me, a district court DA can help more people than anybody else out there. I mean,
Yeah,
more than
that's
a defense
probably,
attorney,
yeah,
more
it's
than a
probably true.
judge.
Yeah.
You have a lot of power in that position, and that takes some getting used to. Some people never get used to it, but
Yeah, I
think
think I think one of the things that is just wild to watch, whether it's, experienced DA or newbie, I mean, it's just so much that's thrown at you. I think one of the things that would have been a real difficulty for me if I had ever gotten into that space is just the multitasking, or kind not even whether you call it multitasking
yeah,
or jumping from task to task. Like that would not have been for me a very pleasant experience. I mean,
it,
at least I imagine. And Yeah, that'd be a rough go.
If you've ever waited tables or bartended, then you've got that training is probably more relevant in some ways to an
Yeah,
ADA running a courtroom
yeah,
than the law part. Because I mean, you know as well as I do, there's not a most of the day has nothing to do with law. If you get into a trial or some sort of suppression hearing, fine. But you're just trying to talk to four different defense attorneys, make sure the judge isn't angry. Bailiff's trying to tell you who's on their way. I mean that aspect. And I used to serve tables when I was in undergrad and high school and all that kind of stuff. And that's more analogous to being a district court DA than anything you learn in law school. To be honest with you.
yeah. That's awesome. I love that. I mean, and it makes sense because yeah. I mean, you're just talking with so many different people in different positions. From the victim gallery, unrepresented defendants, the sheriffs, I mean, it's everybody. I mean, you're just constantly trying to like hammer out a deal in 45 seconds. It's like, that's pretty crazy.
Sure.
So,
Yeah, that's why I mean I remember really quickly learning, you need to know where everything is. And you can tell defense attorneys learn that along the way also, because it's all about like, hey, can I touch this shot? Can I grab this thing? Because prosecutors got to know where all that stuff is. And that's important to them. So always try to be conscientious of that whenever you're dealing with a district court DA, that they're trying to manage a lot of different things. Don't make their job harder.
100%. Yeah, I mean, and again, I guess along those same lines, I think that there is a real value point for anybody that is in criminal defense who has previously been on the prosecutor side of things. And so, some of the lessons that you took away from your role as an assistant DA, what were some of the biggest of those lessons?
Like I've talked to a couple defense attorneys, to be honest with you. I mean, I learned more from situations. The biggest lessons I learned are when I was kind of being a jerk, or I don't want to say a jerk, but like when I made mistakes that I didn't understand that I was even making. All right. And so, this is to me, this is why being a defense attorney, if there's a way that we can make all prosecutors be a defense attorney, at least for 6 months, the whole system would operate 2, 3 times more efficient.
Yeah,
Because
you've told me this a couple of times, and I really think this is interesting.
yeah, I mean, the prosecutor just generally doesn't know what's going on. I mean, they don't know what any of the dynamics. They don't know what a lot of the dynamics are that we have with clients. They don't know the dynamics are as far as the timing of court cases and pleas, and family members, and what defendants actually care about. For a prosecutor, and there's nothing wrong. I'm not criticizing them. This is just the way it has to be. But for most of the time, the prosecutor is just looking at numbers. Okay, I've got a person here with this record, with these facts. This is potential punishment. This is the plea offer I'm going to make, which is a discount. And that's like, they can't approach everything as the defendant is a human being, because they don't have that information. That's our job to prevent that to them. And like calendaring is something that, I mean, I remember throwing people on a calendar, like, just kind of like, all right, well, I haven't talked to Jake about this case. Let me go ahead and put it on there. And then I get a call from you or whoever it may be. Todd Lance is one I'm very specifically remember. And he's like, why is that on the calendar on Monday? I'm like, well, we need to check in. He's like, well, my client lives down in Florida. Like, I can't get him up here. We've got
Yeah,
Judge Downs on the bench, or whoever the judge is.
yeah,
I probably have like 4 or 5. I don't necessarily need to go in because they would be boring to everybody else. But there's a number of situations that I did something like that, oblivious to what was going on, and the defense attorney kind of called me out on it, and it kind of opened my eyes, and I realized, like, all right, you need to not be quite so careless about that calendaring procedure, or you shouldn't be so careless about holding a case open all day long to then ask for a continuance at the last part of the day when the defense attorney's been ready to try that all day. I mean, these are just very specific things that, we're all guilty of being in our own little world. And the prosecutor, for better or for worse, is kind of the center of the universe when it comes to, like,
yeah,
especially district
100%.
court. They really are.
Yeah,
Not the
yeah,
judge.
yeah,
I mean, nothing against our judges. They have a role, but like, prosecutor controls all that stuff. And it's really hard to understand all the impacts that your little decisions are making on everybody else until you've gotten those scars and learned from them and paid attention to like, hey, why is it that Keith Hansen's mad at me right now? Like actually try to like, what did I do wrong? Well, here's what you did, this, and this. And it's like, okay, all right. I see that. I didn't think of that. I was just trying to get to my lunch break. I'm sorry I didn't continue that one case for you. Now you've got to come back and cancel 3 of your appointments that you've got scheduled for the afternoon. That type of thing.
Yeah.
There's too many to list. There's just so many things that the prosecutor doesn't truly appreciate's going on. It's hard for them to do that unless they're really paying attention. But if they just went in private practice for a little while, they'd figure it out. Or public defenders, I assume the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that perspective is so critical. And I think that probably very much the reverse is true, which is, again, why I think that criminal defense lawyers that have that prosecution perspective do have like a distinct advantage on that front, just because there's a recognition of what is going through the DA's mind as they're prepping a case, and like the time constraints of this case versus 60 other, felony cases that they're trying to kind of get prepped over the next 2 months or whatever it might be. So I think it's one of those things that perspective is really everything in district court and I mean in superior as well. But I think that it would be very much like beneficial in the opposite direction too. Like, why don't you go and step into the DA role for a week and see how that, for me, that would be probably like a nightmare. Let's go run, district court, 1A for 5 days. And I'll probably come back, kissing the floor of my office.
It's so different. A relevant quote I heard from Joel Sheckett, a local attorney here in town, was he made some comment, we were talking and I was a prosecutor, he's a public defender at that point. He's in private practice obviously now, but DA's office, which he was saying about me, but he was basically like, DAs are always ready, but never prepared. Yeah. And there's a lot of truth to that because, whenever we go talk to a prosecutor, we're going about one case, maybe 2, whatever it is. And it's our job to know everything we can about that case within reason. No matter what's going on, we have information the prosecutor doesn't have. We always have more information than they do. They have to tell us everything they know. We're supposed to. And we have a whole bunch of information that we don't have to tell them. So it's kind of set up to where the defense side knows what's going on about the case or a lot more detail. Prosecutor may have 300 cases they're dealing with. They may deal with 5 defense attorneys that day. And so there's almost always going to be an imbalance of information and attention span. And, you've got to understand how to, I don't want to say you have to understand. I mean, it is helpful to understand that that's a dynamic there. The prosecutor you're going to is probably doesn't remember everything that you discussed the last time, may need a complete refresher on what the facts of the case are. And that's how it is always going to be. It's not a prosecutor being lazy. That's just, they are going to have a surface level understanding of all their cases. And we would be committing malpractice if we only had a surface level understanding of all of our cases, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, I guess in now kind of being in criminal defense, what is, some kind of having seen that perspective from the ADA position, what, if anything, have you done, to kind of cater to that, whether it's in, requesting discovery, going to an ADA with a potential plea offer? What, if anything, kind of about that prior experience has kind of influenced what you're doing on the criminal defense end of things?
Yeah, really, really easy answer to that, but it may just be me, right? So when I was a prosecutor, what I used to say to the defense attorneys I was working with consistently, I'm sure Booth remembers me saying this too, or Keith Hansen, or whoever it is, they'd come up to me and they'd start talking to me, and I'd just tell them, just tell me what you want, and then tell me why you want it. Because there's a lot of times, like, they may tell me what they want, and I just give it to them I don't need to know your reason why you need to continue today. Like, I got 200 cases on the counter. I don't need to hear your sob story about how your client can't get off work, or whatever it is. Just tell me what you want, and then tell me why. And I've always tried to do that with the prosecutors as a defense attorney. Now, that does require like kind of showing your hand a little bit, because maybe I'm not ambitious enough if a prosecutor says yes without even hearing my reasons. But that is kind of the trick with being a defense attorney, I think, is understanding what the situation is, coming up with what reasonable outcomes are, and then trying to push that envelope. If you go to a prosecutor and ask him to reduce the murder charge down to simple assault, like they're going to tell you to get the hell out of there, right? That's not. But you have to understand. All right, listen, I want voluntary manslaughter. I'm going to tell you why. I mean, those are big cases, much more complicated. Those are not short conversations. But that's what I've always found easy, is to just go to a prosecutor and just tell them, this is what I want, and if you need to hear it, I'll give you the reasons. And if you know that prosecutor really well, and it's not that big of an ask, they don't care, because they know that I'm not going to walk up and ask for something that's unreasonable to the extent that's going to get them in trouble. And there's a little bit of every decision a prosecutor makes in the back of their mind, am I going to get in trouble over this? With their boss, media, victim, judge, whatever it is. And I don't think that a lot of defense attorneys understand that dynamic. But that's how I've tried to take what I'm doing or what I did and use it to my advantage as a defense attorney. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, it does. And I think, you shared something with me a couple of months back about kind of getting a signed plea transcript from your client and going to the DA with that. And so just connecting that back to what you had just said about going to the DA, with what you want and why you want it. I think a lot of attorneys, and I'll put myself in this category, often, whether it's district or superior court, wait for the state to kind of make the first move, wait for the state to kind of put an offer out there. And then it's like, okay, let's go and respond. And so I think, in your mentality of, if I put something out there that maybe does not, the DA really latches onto, it's like, maybe I didn't go in strong enough. But I do think that there is a real tactical advantage to going in and being kind of the first person to establish, like, here's where the line is, so to speak. So yeah, I don't know if you had anything else on that front, but
let me clarify for a second. I'm not going in there with like this plea offer a lot of times without even talking to them. I mean, best practice is try to get an idea as to where the prosecutor is on the plea offer. But
yes,
you know how it is. A lot of times these conversations are more about a bond or a continuance or getting a car back or a phone back that's already been dumped that doesn't need. There's all those kind of things that come into it. But there's like one bedrock principle that I think all of us understand, or I hope we do. The case by default never gets better for the state with age. All right. And so the fault is that the case is going to languish for a while. The prosecutor will soften their stance by just human nature. So I'm not going in there like charging ahead and trying to resolve a case as quickly as possible. So I'm not trying to imply that. However, let's say we're close on a case. Classic example is going to be, just to use a really generic one, armed robbery, where the prosecutor is considering going down to common law robbery, but they want you to plead it open or get an active sentence on it. That would be a normal thing that we'd be haggling over. And you think that your client deserves a split sentence because he's already got 60 days that he's already served before he bonded out or something like that. That's one where it's just like understanding that if you just take a prosecutor, the transcript, here, I've got it filled out for you. It's got all the stuff filled in. All you have to do is sign it. My client's already signed it. We can have this case over in 30 minutes if we walk in the courtroom right now, and you never have to talk to me about this again. Prosecutors will take that deal when they don't want to do the deal. A lot. I mean, just a number of times they're going to sit there and say, all right, I've got 351 cases. Now I'm down to 350 after this one. And use that to your advantage, because that's in the context of, and this as well as I do, I think I've worded before, my wife's a family law attorney, super jealous that she can have an honest conversation with the other attorney and trade back and forth. Hey, you get the beach house, but I get the boat.
Yeah.
I'll take the kids on Christmas, but you get them on Thanksgiving. Well, as defense attorneys, for the most part, we don't have anything to offer a prosecutor except for one thing, and that's time.
Yep.
We can save them time of never having to deal with this case, never having to try it, not having to speak to their victim anymore, not having to speak to me anymore, and we can use that to our advantage. So if I feel like I'm close with the case and they won't give me what I want, then I just go ahead and package it all up and hand it to them and just say, I know you don't want to do what I'm asking, but we can also move on with our lives if we just do it right now.
Yeah.
And they'll take it. Not every time, but a lot of times that's what you need to push them over the edge.
Yeah, along that same lines, in terms of a district court example that I can think of recently, there was our attorney in our Durham office, Kelsey, had one of a number of co-defendants recently that got charged with basically riding around on the streets of Durham on four-wheelers and basically causing all kinds of like chaos and madness. I mean, just silliness on the road. And so the prosecutor had put all of these cases on one day, so it's all packaged together, trying to work out deals that are similar, but also taking into account each individual defendant's situation. Had offered Kelsey a reduction on the charge if person did 20 hours of community service, and let's continue this out to, the next date that all of these other related cases are going to. And Kelsey was like, that sounds good. I like the reduction. We could do it right now. We can have him come back in a couple months and do the 20 hours of community service, or you can be one case lighter, with all of these other cases that have already got set out to that next day. You got this giant docket already scheduled for this next day. The prosecutor's like, all right, let's just go ahead and do it. And so it's again, it's one of those situations where if you, for especially experienced prosecutors, I think this is more once you've kind of removed yourself from kind of the kind of personal bent of the case, or kind of like having an attachment. Once it's more about docket management, that I think really is a huge power point.
And so here's a dynamic that gets frustrating on that, right? So, a prosecutor who's handling their own docket, like their own caseload, like classic Superior Court prosecutors, they know that every month they're going to get 15 new cases or 30 new cases, where that number is. So if they want to tread water, they got to get rid of 30 cases just to break even, or whatever those numbers are. In a county like Buncombe, you run into some problems because, one ADA maybe in 1A this month, they can continue their problems to next month. Who knows if they'll be in there? So in Madison County, where you've got one ADA with one docket, like totally different conversation than in Buncombe County, where they can literally just, shove it back into the river and hope it, floats down the river to somebody else and somebody else's problem. And, that docket management, if a prosecutor understands what's going on, and, good prosecutors will understand also that, like, hey, somebody's gonna have to deal with it, and hopefully they're not just pushing off on their friends, or it may come back to them. But if you got a prosecutor who understands that cases will not stop coming and you just got to get rid of them, then that's how you can use that to your advantage. That is what I learned as a prosecutor, and that's what I try to use to our advantage as a defense attorney.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I guess, in terms of kind of coming into the criminal defense realm, what led to that? What was kind of the point at which you kind of came into the criminal defense side of things?
Yeah, well, like I said, first off, my mind changed as far as what their role was. So my career path was, I was in district court for like a year and a half or so. Not a particularly long time back then in that office. So, I went up Superior Court in January of 2009. So started in September of 2007, January of 2009, I went to Superior Court. I think I tried my first homicide maybe that December or something like that. I mean, pretty
that's fast.
Quick trajectory as far as that goes. I remember that guy's name, but at some point I had been doing the job for long enough. I ran for judge twice. I don't know if you were there for either one of those times, but we had a bar vote and I finished second in it, but I did not get it. Got an interview with the governor. So for a while there, I was on the kick of like, well, I want to be a judge. Well, so I tried and I failed with the bar vote. I mean, we got second in the vote, but the governor didn't appoint me. And then I tried in the general election and ran against one of our judges and didn't make it. At the time I filed to run for judge, I had made up my mind and I didn't tell my wife, I discussed with my wife. And I think I'd even told my boss, like, if I don't get this, I'm going to be resigning from the office and moving on, because I was ready to go be a defense attorney. I think I'd try to from my perspective, this is arrogant, but like, I thought I've kind of done everything I want to do or can do at the DA's office, except for try a capital case. I wasn't one of those guys that's like, I need to try a capital case. Didn't really care. So it gets boring as a prosecutor really quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same thing every day, same type of cases. Every once in a while you get one that's tricky. And I was ready to go out there and try something different, try to make a little bit more money. And when the judge thing didn't work out, my boss didn't get elected, which made that effectively a pretty easy decision for me to make to leave. There was some talk about me staying with the incoming DA, but in the end, he didn't want that. And I could not be more thankful, because, I stepped out into private practice in January of 15 and have not had a day since then that I regretted it. I mean, my practice
awesome.
Took off, couldn't be more happier. It does not get boring ever, as you know. I mean, the case is just
no, it doesn't get boring. It really doesn't.
No, it doesn't. I mean, you get tired of some stuff, but I get tired of waking up in the morning too sometimes. I mean, I don't want to do it, So yeah, that's what it is. I really just at some point decided this is what I want to do, and went out and did it, and just really enjoyed. I think it fits me better. I was never one of those guys that was like, I want to protect our community. I'm not saying I didn't want to, but that's not what drove me to be a prosecutor. It was a job. I had it. I did it, and I enjoyed it. And I had some great friendships I made in that office. But with that office coming to a close, then it was easy for me to just transition. And given that I just run a campaign, I had plenty of contacts, and so I feel very lucky with how all that worked out.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, I don't know how much this is actually played into practice, but again, I think that you are definitely one of the prosecutors that local criminal defense lawyers had respect for, and kind of, again, seeing things from the other side of the table. You just get used to working with the same people in district and superior court. That's just the nature of the game when you're in and out of the courthouse every single day. And so, I mean, I imagine you immediately had like kind of a contact list to kind of tap into for questions on that front. But also, I mean, I would assume also probably had some level of referral connection just from people coming in and out of counties. Hey, I'm not going to handle this thing. So I don't know if that, kind of played out in real time, but you definitely seem like somebody that had a really good reputation with the criminal defense bar while you were still in ADA.
Yeah, I'm sure they complained about me behind my back when I was a prosecutor. I have no doubt about that.
Well, that happens with everybody. I mean, that's
you're right. But I'd like to think that I had a pretty good relationship with most of the defense attorneys. And I mean, there's a number of attorneys that are kind of my gold standards. And that changes, and I don't want to leave anybody off, but Sean Devereaux, Jack Stewart, those guys, in my opinion, are very different in how they approach the job, but are absolutely great attorneys. And
yes.
If I were in trouble, those two are top of the list. Yeah. There's guys, obviously, like Al Messer, Andy Banzoff, that were, they're all also in that conversation. Those people were really good to me. And when I went out, they threw me some business that they didn't need or didn't want, and that kept me afloat, or however you want to look at it, and got me to where I was established. And that's something I've always tried to pass on. So anytime colleagues of mine or friends of mine go into private practice, I've tried to pay that forward. And so when a close friend of mine leaves the DA's office, I try to give him some business and help him get under his feet underneath him, like people did for me. And And I think that's really important. We have a good bar with
We do.
really
Yeah.
experienced attorneys who look after young attorneys and will pull you aside and say, you may want to tone it down on that conversation, or I hear what you're saying, but have you thought about this? And I could not be more appreciative of being surrounded by people like that.
Yeah, 100% agree. I mean, I think it was probably first few months of being locally here working at the firm that I started out with. And I reached out to Al Messer for, hey, do you have any, suggestions? And I didn't know Al from Adam. I
Sure.
don't think I'd ever even met him in person. I just knew that he was, searched online, like this is one of the local gurus, can you
Yeah, he's
suggest
great.
anything? And he wrote me, detailed email back. Here's the, books that I would recommend looking into. And yeah, Andy and Al have always been that like kind of mentor attitude, and happy to answer a question about any case. I think it's really a important thing for young lawyers to recognize that, most of the defense attorneys in the local bar want to help out young lawyers. Like, I mean, I just think that that's part of, I mean, again, maybe this is different, depending on which bar you're in, across the state, but I think that there's a real attitude of, hey, if you want help, all you gotta do is ask, but a lot of people just don't ask. And I think if you're curious, then that's a good place to start.
Well, and I think, I'm somewhere in the middle there, right? Like I'm not those guys, okay? But I'm not the newest person anymore either. And I mean, Sean and I actually subleased my office from him. So like, we're relatively close and we talk a lot. And, I get a sense that, he gets something out of it too. When a young attorney comes and asks him a question, you know, there's no correct answer to this stuff. Again, to use Sean and Jack as two, just, I think everybody I know, judges, everybody would agree that they are just absolute titans, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
But they're different people. And I'm telling you, as a prosecutor who worked against both those guys and now has worked with both of them as a defense attorney, to me, they approach situations very differently with different personalities and different tact, but they're both ruthlessly effective at it. And, it's good to hear other attorneys relay a problem and what they think is important and ask questions about it. I mean, when and if young attorneys come to me and talk about stuff like that, I mean, they say things all the time that I'm like, well, I hadn't really thought about that, but
Yeah.
So it's not a parasite relationship. That's how it felt to me when I was young, and I go and talk to these guys. I'm
Yeah,
really
I agree.
sorry,
Yeah.
but it's not. It's very, what's the term, symbiotic or whatever. I mean, the older attorneys learn things from younger attorneys, and it's the way that all of us, I think. I mean, I don't want to speak for them. For me, it's a great way to keep your mind sharp.
It is.
And to circulate issues around everybody.
Yeah, I think that, one of the maybe metrics for some of these great lawyers that you've just talked about is there's always an interest in getting better. And so, and learning something. And so anytime there's like this question that kind of brings up, this legal question, that's what these guys are like waiting for in the break room, in the courtroom. It's like, oh, let me think about that. There's something that is really exciting about that conversation. Well, in terms of kind of opening up your practice, I'm sure that there was like a time, obviously, you came out, you were doing criminal defense, used to that, you'd seen district court, superior court. So I'm sure there was a time when it's like, anything that is living and breathing, I will, represent this person if they're charged with the crime. But you ultimately have kind of shifted your practice into more serious crime representation. So talk a little bit about kind of how that progressed.
Yeah. So, like you said, anything that would come through the door, I'd take it. I did one or two small claims actions when I first started off.
I've been there as well.
Yeah, that's right. Like, I hate those things, but I had a couple personal injury cases that I took early on. Now, like, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I thought, my experience as a prosecutor had been with kind of jack of all trades, master of none, but pretty serious stuff. That's what I was doing at the tail end of my DA career. Murders. I think I'd done 7 homicide trials in the last 3 years of my practice, or
that's
DA's
wild.
office or something like that. But I'd done a lot of those with Chris Hess. He was the kind of the top dog at the DA's office at that point. We were the people who were getting those kind of cases. And again, great mentor for me. Very good prosecutor, probably the hardest working state employee I've ever met. I thought, all right, personal injury cases, I may want to do that, but I thought I've got time right now to learn how to do that stuff. And I did those cases, but what I learned is I don't really like them all that much. And so I ended up co-opting attorneys in, and then I'd stopped taking those kind of cases pretty quickly. I took an approach that I think was helpful to me, but not everybody can do that. Man, Jake, I took every little case from every little county I could get my hands on with the perspective of this. All right, I don't know if I'm going to be taking very many cases in Graham County, but I'd rather the first time I show up to Graham County be on a speeding ticket than me show up to Graham County on a rape charge, And so I took these cases that I probably broke even on at best, but I had time on my hands. So, all right, I'm gonna take a speeding ticket for $300, drive to Graham County, at least know where it is, introduce myself to the clerk, introduce myself to the judges, become a familiar face. And then when I got the big cases that mattered, I wasn't walking into something I didn't know what was going on. And that I think was really helpful to me, because I don't like walking into situations that I don't know anything about it. I have since become really comfortable doing that, but I wasn't in the beginning. And it's a sobering experience as a prosecutor. Again, alluding to what we were talking about earlier, you think you know everything. Not that you know everything, but you think you know what's going on, and then you step out and you're like, I don't know what's going on. You don't know what to do on a plea. I've probably done 500 pleas as a prosecutor, but when you do your first one as a defense attorney, it's like, what do I do? So there was a process of just kind of like getting my feet under me and going from being somebody who could do things in their sleep to then realizing, holy cow, different ball game, and having to relearn everything from, it'd be almost like learning to write with your left hand.
Yes.
You know the alphabet, you know how to spell, you know how to write, and you're used to doing it and you do it instinctually. But when you're a defense attorney, you kind of got to pick up your left hand and figure out how to do it. And that for me, that was really unsettling. But I took a lot of cases, and what I figured out, I think, is that in spite of what I thought, I'm okay being in situations where I'm really uncomfortable. That it causes anxiety, but it doesn't bother me deep down. I'm not efficient. So a guy who takes 20 speeding tickets and walks into admin court, I waste too much time doing that. And so you can't be efficient on these big cases. And I had experience with the big cases, and the big cases are scary and make you uncomfortable, but that part doesn't really bother me. And so I just kind of transitions toward that. I mean, that's just kind of what fits my personality. And luckily, my reputation and all that kind of stuff has worked out. And my practice has really transitioned to that. I remember somebody telling me early on, if you're going to take those kind of cases, you kind of can't get bogged down with a speeding ticket here and there. And so my practice has dwindled on that. I'll still take them, but they're almost always a referral from an attorney or a friend or something like that. But most of it's, show up and deal with something that's, a big deal, and just roll up your sleeves and get in there and figure it out.
Man, I love that. There's so many things to unpack in that story. And I think one of the big ones is kind of going into these counties where now, again, you're operating on, a major felony case, not having that be the first time you appear in court, knowing where the clerk's office is, who to talk to, who the local DA is in this particular small county, having an interaction with them. Like, there is so much value in going out and kind of getting the local flavor when the stakes are low. And I think that's really a cool thing and very powerful for anybody that is trying to maybe establish like a multi-county practice. That's one of those things that, just never crossed my mind as being like really a value point of let this be the first interaction. I really like that.
Yeah, it doesn't instill confidence on your client, if they hire you for something and you don't even know where the courthouse is or where the entrance is or things like that. And so,
Yeah.
at this point, I think, I tell people I've handled a major case in pretty much every county west of Charlotte. That's probably not 100% accurate, but I think I counted it's like 23 counties in Western North Carolina that I've gone in on something that's got serious substance to it, like felony or like a sexual battery, some sort of high level misdemeanor. And, at some point, you get more comfortable walking in those counties you don't know, and it's not a big deal. But I just thought this is all really scary, and I want to reduce as much of that fear and anxiety as I can right now while I have time. And I'm sure somebody told me to do that. I don't think that was probably an original idea for me, but I did it and it worked out, and I've passed it on to my buddies when they've opened up their practices also.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, I think that one reason why lawyers don't take cases to trial or handle a charge that maybe they're not familiar with is just that discomfort that you were just talking about, right? You don't want to look like human beings generally do not want to look like a fool in front of other human beings. And that gets kind of like magnified and, you're under the microscope to some extent when you're in the courtroom. And so there's some level of like, very legitimate fear about like, I don't want to look silly, but I think that most of us, it's more just being fear of the unknown versus really the prospect that you're actually going to look silly, because nobody 100% knows what they're doing in the courtroom. I mean, that's just part of lawyer.
I tell you, this is what I learned. So, and you know what this as well as I do. Every clerk's office is different,
They are.
and they'll all sit there and be like, it must be done this way. And I'm like, well, nobody else in the state does it that way. They all do it that way. So I know but like, I learned if you just walk in and be humble and act like, hey, listen, I don't know where I'm going. The bailiffs will be super nice to everybody. It's not, you can't walk in there with your chest puffed out and all that kind of stuff. If you just walk in and tell everybody, I don't know what's going on.
Yes.
I've got this thing. What am I supposed to do? Then they will be so helpful to you. And that's how I've always approached the counties as I walk in. At some point, people get to know you before they've met you, but just be humble and walk into places and act like you don't know what's going on. And man, a prosecutor, a judge, and a clerk will take pity on you really quickly, and then you can do what you can move mountains at that point.
Yeah. No, I think Judge Mercer had some good advice. Probably about 2 years back, I was walking up to him in a different county. I kind of first met him here in Buncombe, but he sits as a visiting judge all around, and I kind of just said, you get to it must be somewhat like difficult to be a visiting judge where you're like sitting in family court this day in this county, and you're doing a DWI trial over here, the next day. Like you not only have to like look at all of these various issues of law and don't get to kind of like hone down on one space, but you've got to learn all of the different counties the way they do it. Like how does that work for you? And he's like, I just walk in the courtroom and I ask the clerk, what am I supposed to do today?
Sure.
And I was like, that really is like the best answer. It's like, how are we going to do things? How do you want me to say things? How, what is the papers that you're going to need me to sign? Like just ask the clerk. And I think that humility, as you just spoke to, again, I think we all, coming out of law school feel like we should know everything. I'm going to look silly if I don't. When in reality, everybody that's been doing it for a while is like, I still don't know everything that I'm supposed to know. So
I don't think it hasn't gone away from me yet.
Yeah.
When I talk to the older guys, I don't think it ever goes away. I mean, our clients want to know, it's wild because you deal with a case and you're like, I don't know what I'm going to do on this. But then your client asks you questions, you're able to tell them a whole bunch more than you even know. And I think I think a lot of times we don't know what we know. We don't, we have so much information kind of packed in there.
Oh yeah.
And every case is so different that it's hard not to be intimidated on a lot of this stuff. But it's I will talk to my client, I think if you talk to them, they'd say that I'm in control and I know what's going on. But then I'll turn around and go talk to the clerk and I'll be like, hey, where's the file, or whatever it is. But that's the two hats that we wear on some level. And it's important to just understand who you're talking to and how they'll perceive you. Out of town attorneys can get in trouble really quickly if they walk in with an attitude, and I've seen great attorneys do that, and some of them pull it off, and there's maybe a time and a place for it. But for the most part, just recognize that when you're going into one of these, like a smaller county, Asheville to a smaller county, they may look at you a little different. Just like we look at a Mecklenburg County person comes into Bunk County. It's like, who's this guy? What's going on? Somebody's hired that guy to come into Buncombe to deal with this case.
Yeah.
So you just have to know where you're at and understand how that can affect how people may respond to you. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it definitely does. Yeah, I think that definitely does. It's I mean, I think you're always, again, trying to be the local. I mean, and sometimes you're not. And so I think that the easiest way to do that, as you've kind of talked about here over the last 15 minutes, is just spend time getting to know the local space, the local people. And I mean, that's the easiest way to bring that local experience into your practice, is to actually do it. So, what, in terms of kind of like where the kind of world of criminal defense is here in 2024, you again have seen this now from both sides of the table. You see changes in the practice of law over your career. What is some of the kind of like biggest challenges that you say would kind of be facing us as solo and small firm criminal defense owners here in 2024?
Well, on the law side of things, we got this e-courts thing that is just going to like affect everything. I don't know how much,
I should say that that's not like allowed to be the answer, because that's everybody. Like, I mean, that is like the answer. I mean, that's definitely like front and center, the biggest question mark. I mean, I totally agree.
It's a question mark, but I'll tell you what my perspective is, and then we can just kind of move on, because it's one of those things like people are like, oh, it's gonna be so bad, it's gonna be so bad. And it's like, I don't really care. Like, it's our job to just deal with it. And like us as the defense side, we have no control over it. It's all going to be somebody else's problem for the most part. Prosecutors, clerks, and judges dealing with that, and we're just going to have to figure out how to navigate. That's no different than how to navigate a difficult ADA or a busy day or anything else. We'll figure that out, but it's going to be really disruptive. I mean, Mercer's who I've talked to the most about it, and it just seems Judge Mercer, and it seems like it's going to be really hard. On the private practice side of things, advertising just seems to be it seems like it's changed a lot just in the last year. And you've got this big lawsuit out there with Google where they're talking about breaking them up because they basically just have the entire thing. That could change things big time. If Google gets kind of slapped down a little bit where they can't, control everything. Because I don't know about you, but when I started my practice in 2015, referrals are and always have been huge for me, and I hope always will be. Okay. And then you've got the piece of the pie of people that don't know anything, but they just know they need an attorney and they're looking for one. That has changed a lot. When I started, Avo was huge. I got a lot of stuff from Avo.
Yeah, me too. And then it's dried up completely.
I don't even know if I still subscribe to it. I'm checking my marketing person, but that used to be most of the non-referral business I get was from Avo. And now I don't remember the last time I saw it. It's pretty much just Google. I mean, that's what everybody runs off of. I got one guy the other day that came in, he said he found me on Bing. And I was like, that's your search engine? I didn't know that people actually did that. But if Google gets broken up, then everything's going to get thrown off a little bit, because that's kind of the alpha and the omega of that piece of the pie of people that know they need an attorney but don't know anything about them. And they go to Google, they'll read our reviews and go to our websites and stuff. But if Google can control that quite like they do, I think that's going to change a lot of things. So
Yeah, I 100% agree about that. I mean, just to kind of go back to the, e-courts real quick, in terms of, I like the mentality of it's coming, we can't change it unless you want to retire, which, I don't think most of us want to do that. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
unless you want to retire, you're going to have to deal with it. I think
Yep.
that one of the, kind of like biggest ways to prepare for that is, just to be as like a criminal defense bar kind of a part of the conversation. Like, how are we going to implement this well at the local level? What is that going to mean for us here in Buncombe County or whatever county that you practice in? Like, how are we going to kind of make this run as smoothly as possible, knowing that it's going to be a shipwreck? So I mean, I think that is where we have the control, and I think that that's probably been a part of the difficulty in both Wake and Mecklenburg as it's rolled out, is that I don't know that everybody was really on the same page as how this was going to happen. So I think the more we can get uh, preemptive about that, the better off we're going to be.
No, I think lately this is a relatively new development in my career. The judges and everybody has done a pretty good. Leanne Melton was kind of the tip of the spear on this, to be honest with you. I mean,
Yeah.
trying to incorporate the criminal defense bar, give them a seat at the table so they can talk about this stuff. And I think that that'll continue. I mean, I know Judge Thornburg that's our chief resident. He's been very, front footed about trying to make sure we're involved in the conversation because we have different perspectives. This e-courts thing is just done from such a central location.
Yes.
It feels like it is basically the train's going to come to town. We all got to hop on it. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know how much steering there is or choosing where it's going to go. We just have to get on it. And somebody had mentioned possibly bringing in an attorney from one of those counties just to come in and talk to us, so we have at least a heads up on it. And that needs to be done, and hopefully somebody can organize it. But I don't think there's much control in it or steering it, man.
Yeah, no, I don't think there is. I think it's just, when there's something that feels so overwhelming, I think it's, there's got to be an attitude of like, how can I help? And, when it comes to like the ADA side of things in the courtroom, when there's a billion things going on, sometimes you can just be like, hey, do you need me to take that file back to the assistant to run a driving record? Like, happy to do that while you keep on rolling. I think a lot of that is going to have to happen as e-courts rolls out, particularly on the DA side. Like, how can we figure out little ways to make it just slightly faster for the DA to do what they're going to do? Because again, as much as they're steering the ship currently, it's probably almost more in that direction as like e-courts rolls out, because it's all running through, centralized. Like, there's only certain users that can, as far as I can tell, touch items that are in the queue, touch files.
Hey,
Files that are in the
I want to
queue.
be there when you offer to grab the keyboard from the prosecutor and dismiss all cases.
Let me take your computer and see what I can.
You want me to type out
All
these
you got to do is
dismissals?
push this little VD
Yeah.
checkbox right here.
Select all BD, done.
Yeah, I think it's it'll be interesting, but I think the more that we can be on the same page on that front across the state, like in our local areas, the better.
I agree.
And I guess, kind of along that same lines, here, over the next decade, beyond just kind of the advertising side of things, do you see any other kind of major developments coming down the pike on the criminal defense side of things?
Yeah, so I think the most pressing one right now, and just locally, we're getting ready to have a tremendous amount of turnover on the bench, and people tend to get on the bench and not leave, as well they should if they're doing a good job. So that's going to be a big deal for Buncombe as far as that. But
Yes.
We're going to have a bunch of turnover here locally. But as far as like the actual practice and everything like that, I don't really know. I generally think that it's just our job to react to it. The biggest one that's happened so far, and to me, I'm wondering if it's going to start swinging back, is when you and I started our career as defense attorneys, you're allowed one expunction for your entire life.
Yeah.
Now, for a period, everything got automatically expunged, but now you can have infinite ones, and it is getting easier and easier to clean up people's records. But the momentum has got to stop at some point. And so that worries me a little bit. Like I want that to keep on. I think people should have clean records. But does that start slowing down? And then the question is like, well, what's next? Like, what is the thing that's getting ready to be a driving force? And I think that's hard to predict. I think we just need to recognize it and try to figure out where to go from there. If I had to pick one thing that I'm hoping will get softened and we can see some movement over the next 5 or 10 years, is mandatory sentences. That's the thing that has probably resulted in more injustice in our criminal justice system than anything else. And I know it's got a role, but the whole idea of having mandatory sentences on drug trafficking cases and whatever they may be is that we trust prosecutors to use their discretion, and we've got a lot of great prosecutors who use their discretion. But then you got other places and other counties or a prosecutor who gets stubborn about it and they won't do it.
Yeah.
And then, it's kind of hard. I've had to have that conversation with my clients over and over again. It's like, listen, man, it doesn't matter if you're Mother Teresa, you've never been arrested and you've been the best human being in the world, or if you've killed 15 people before, like you're gonna get the same sentence.
Yes.
And I refuse to believe that is an optimal system. And we need to find a way to get away from that. That's a relic from the war on drugs. And I know that drugs destroy our community, and I know that they need to be taken seriously. And I recognize that individuals need to go to jail sometimes for long times. But this one size fits all, especially when we're dealing with as little as 4 grams, for crying out loud, on drugs, that's where I want to kind of push forward. And I hope we see some movement on that being changed.
Yeah. Just given that, I don't do a lot of felony drug cases. I mean, I've done a handful of low level, felony drug cases over my career, but not very, very many. And certainly like almost no serious drug charges. I mean, is that something that you've seen a softening over your career, and just in terms of how it's treated, even if like the laws haven't changed, or have you seen some positive traction in that?
So it's mostly a personnel issue, right? So, if you go to one county that's got the hardest prosecutor in the world, forget it, you're toast. Okay. And there's one specific county I can name that me and anybody like me that does that kind of work, like we all don't like going to that county because that county really just doesn't want to work with you on anything. And I don't feel worthless, but it's frustrating because it's just like you're talking to a wall. But the issue that I have seen is this: when I started, like in the meat of my career, and I'm going to make up numbers here, but I was just talking to the chief drug prosecutor in Buncombe County. We taught a CLE together, and we were discussing this, and he had the same thought that I had and was consistent. When we started, you maybe had 20% of all drug cases were trafficking, 80% were low-level drug cases, like possession with intent, things like that. It was mostly cocaine, meth, LSD sometimes, hardly ever saw marijuana or heroin or stuff like that. Now, okay, fentanyl is the dominant drug. I don't remember the last time I dealt with a serious drug case that fentanyl wasn't a central role in. And I mean, there may be drugs with it, but like fentanyl is almost all drug cases. It only takes 4 grams to be trafficking for fentanyl because it's an opiate. And now it's like probably 80 or 90% of all drug cases are trafficking.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And so, we've had this flip, and, we're dealing with somebody, there's no shortage of news stories you read, like so-and-so was arrested with, a large fentanyl bust, and it was enough fentanyl to kill every citizen in Buncombe County. And that's not hyperbole. It's true. Like that stuff's out there. But when you're talking about 4 grams, it is possible to have an end user that has 4 grams of fentanyl. These are not, a gram is a sweet and low packet. I don't know if you knew that. Whoever's watching, it's very deadly. It's a lot of it. But now everybody that basically has a drug charge, no, I shouldn't say everybody, the vast majority of drug charges, from my perspective, seem to be trafficking, which means now people with no record, drug addicts, are looking at 70 months. And I'm sitting here. I had a judge tell me one time, I was dealing with a case where I was trying to get reduced I was trying to get a deal for my client. And the judge, he's like, you know what, Thomas, I wish you knew how many abatements I sign every month for people who have overdosed on drugs. That's one of those that hit me one time. I was kind of like,
that
man,
is.
I never once
Yeah.
thought about
Yeah.
the judge sitting over their desk, signing a bunch of abatements. That was a blind spot I had.
Yeah.
And I'm not commenting on whether or not the judge should or shouldn't be thinking that when we're doing a sentence, but that's what's going through at least one judge's mind every time he's sentencing, is all the people who have been killed by that drug. And the prosecutors get the same thing. And so now we got a situation where in Buncombe County, I think last time I checked, they don't want to let any fentanyl cases into drug treatment court. I understand why, or at least the default is no. But now you're basically saying we've got our most dangerous drug that causes the most addictions, and it's the lion's share of all caseload, is now not allowed to go to drug court. And politics play a role in all this stuff, and I'm sympathetic to our electeds who have to deal with that. But it's changed everything. Like the drug cases have changed dramatically over my 15, hell, even you want to go 7, even the last 7 years. It's really taken a pretty dramatic turn, and it makes it hard. I mean, I'm not trying to say poor me or anything like that, but you know what I mean?
That is interesting. Yeah, no, that's a huge difference. I mean, that's interesting to, I mean, you're starting off in a completely different bargaining position when it's charged as trafficking versus possession. And so, I mean, just a humongous difference, from the get-go. So to see that big of a shift from what was charged as trafficking versus felony possession, that recent in time, that's pretty interesting. So, well, as we kind of come to a close, you have been, I would say, very influential in the local criminal defense bar. I mean, of very much a figurehead in terms of the local bar with, the DA's office and our district and superior court judges. And so what would you say? I think this is one of the best ways for criminal defense lawyers across the state to up their game, is to have a really good local defense bar. What would you say are some of the best ways or a way to improve the local bar?
Are you talking about like just from the criminal, like fellow colleague perspective, or are you talking about just the entire ecosystem?
I mean, either way that you want to go, Thomas. I mean,
Okay.
whichever one you think.
Peak criminal defense bar was when we had Megan Burke.
Yeah,
And that
she
required,
was
she
just
was such
amazing.
she was awesome, wasn't she?
Yeah,
She's such a great organizer.
she
And,
is.
defense attorneys, maybe attorneys by nature, but definitely defense attorneys, we're like herding cats, man. I mean, if you get in the attorney lounge, you talk to 5 people, you're going to have 5 different opinions about how a case should be handled.
Yeah.
Some of them may be wildly different. And so trying to get that as a united front is really, really hard. And she was uniquely talented to do that. But that's, I get a sense that you're trying to do that, and I appreciate that. And I'm happy to help however I can. I'm not a good organizer. I think I have certain roles that I'm more comfortable with, but organization's not my number one goal. Hence, I'm not efficient with the smaller cases. But so really everybody being organized and discussing stuff. It's like when I'm sitting there and talking to a local attorney, and I'm like, hey, I just had this issue with this discovery with this agency, and they're like, same thing happened to me last week.
Yeah.
And then you send an email out and you get 2 other people. Like, there needs to be more of a continuing conversation. It will benefit everybody if you just let everybody know. If you have a problem, let your colleagues know, because it's real easy in our own little head to sit here and say, wow, this was really frustrating. I handled it, and then move on to the next case, which is well within your rights to do. But I think we all learn from just talking to other attorneys and figuring out, okay, oh, well, that's an issue. Well, how'd you handle it? How'd the judge respond? And then you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time there's an issue.
Yes.
And so I think that's, from the local bar perspective, like the most important thing. It's somewhat the same thing with the ecosystem. I've been working long enough that there are judges who are on the bench. I wouldn't call them colleagues because they're still older than me, but like we've been doing it for long enough that if I have a concern, we can talk about it. And you'll be surprised that they'll voice their concerns to you also at that point. And I think conversations are good. I think in a perfect world, everybody sees each other, talks in chambers, even over lunch or whatever it is. And just, hey, how's your week gone? You're
Yes.
going to hear some things, whether it be a judge, a prosecutor, like it's an adversarial system, but it doesn't need to be like that. And,
Yes.
I think it's important to sit down. There are prosecutors who I really don't like working with because for various different reasons, but I still try to make an effort to sit down and talk to them and just ask them how their life's going, how their week's going. And, you can pick up on a lot of things. I've had that conversation before and that prosecutor said, hey, this one defense attorney just did this and I didn't like it. What do you think about that, Thomas? And we had a conversation and, I went and pulled the defense attorney aside. Next time I saw him was like, tell me about that issue you had. And I talked to them about it. And that worked out really well. And I remember, the younger defense attorney was kind of like, I really appreciate you highlighting that. I had never thought about it from that perspective. And that would not have happened unless I had sat down and had that just purely more or less personal, became professional conversation with the prosecutor, and then took the opportunity to make sure that the defense attorney knew what their perspective was, and boom, I don't want to say problem solved, but you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, no, I mean,
I hope that if I do something and you know about it, you'll come up to me and you'll tell me about it. I know you would, but the only reason you're going to know that if you're having those conversations. So I think we're all colleagues, whether we're a judge, a prosecutor, defense attorney, and even if you don't love working with somebody, you're going to be working with them. So just grow up and be an adult and be professional about it and try to keep everything cordial.
I think there's so much again in that to unpack. I mean, I think when I first started practicing, one of the best things to do here locally was just go sit in the attorney lounge and listen to attorneys bounce cases off of each other, discuss like, hey, I've got a plea, in front of this, particular judge today. How do you think that's going to go? Other people answer. I mean, it was just so much value in just sitting there and listening. And I would go to other counties around, and more or less in a lot of these places, it was more of just a bitching session. If there was like a lot of attorneys in the same room and repetitively like, I think it's okay to vent about a situation or even a client, like on specific occasions. But it was like, that's all that was getting discussed. And I would think to myself, man, there's so much lost, in this opportunity of all of these attorneys being in the same room. And there's never a conversation going on as to, how to handle something a specific way. And I think one of the real benefits of, again, just how like Buncombe County has that like attorney lounge set up, both in the old building when we started and now in the new building, is that there was a room where there really wasn't negotiations going on with the DA, but that DAs or judges were allowed, encouraged to come into. And in other counties, you're somewhat having like that private defense, almost exclusively private defense bar sitting in there while one particular attorney is negotiating with the DA. So there's kind of like business going on and a DA that's kind of working the docket, always present. And there's something different about when it's just kind of in this informal setting, almost like, where there's that we're not waiting in line. We're just here sitting with one another. So
Yeah. I think there's some different dynamics also when you're dealing with a county that has one prosecutor
yes,
and typically has one judge. I mean, that's
Yep.
two
Yep.
hard and fast choke points right there. In Buncombe County, you got multiple prosecutors, you got multiple judges, and it feels like it's more of a 5-lane highway instead of a single lane
Yes.
gravel road, if
Yeah.
you know what I mean.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think there's some efficiency benefits that we have, and you're right. I never really thought about it like that. When I go to these other counties, there is just a lot of complaining. Whereas when you go here, there is complaining, but there's also like, well, what are we going to do about it? You
Yeah.
know, like
Yeah.
somebody should go talk to Todd about it, or somebody should go talk to, Judge whoever it is about it. And there's a little bit more of a, let's see if we can fix it.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's unique to Buncombe or if that's just the nature of the size that we are and that we're big enough to where we can kind of maneuver a little bit. But
Yeah.
that's an interesting point.
Yeah. And I also think that there is a good amount of just that kind of, again, when you're not sitting there like waiting in line almost, but just kind of in the lounge to be for a little bit, there is, again, the non, work related discussions that you were also just describing that are so valuable among the criminal defense bar specifically, of just, kind of like getting to know one another. And I think that's really been something that is incredibly, incredibly powerful and healthy in terms of like then at some point going on a united front and being like, hey, can we kind of get together on this issue? So I think that's a huge opportunity if that's not kind of how it is. In your, you're the listeners, like local area. I think it's really important to have those kind of conversations be available through that informal discussion. Well, Thomas, I mean, you have shared so much wisdom here over the course of the conversation. Again, I hugely respect you as a criminal defense lawyer. You're definitely one of the, local warriors, as you were just describing. Like when I think of people that are, really going to battle for people in the courtroom, you're really right there. I mean, it's just it's impressive to see the level of cases that you're taking on currently in such a wide locational space. And again, really appreciate you taking the time to share your wisdom with the audience.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate everything you're doing. I have a lot of respect for you and kind of how you built your practice. We come from different backgrounds and we have different practices, but nonetheless, you're my model. All right. Anytime we talk about the best businessmen in the bar, like that's you right there. And you've also been really good about bringing people together and doing your best to kind of pick up the torch and carry on what Burke has done and or started, I should say. And I really enjoy our bar. I'm happy to support
Me too.
any local members, and you're one of the unique characters we have in our bar, and we're lucky to have you.
Yeah, appreciate that. It's all as I have shared many times on here, it's all trial by fire. So it's
Yeah, it is.
mistakes, mistakes have been the best learning lesson. So
Mhm.
well, sweet man. Well, I appreciate everything. Hope you have an awesome Friday.
All right, thank you.